What is up, Pauper players? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper Saturday video. Today we're going to take a look at a brand new anti-meta deck that was shown in the 5.0 drops. You've already seen the thumbnail, you've already seen the title, you know what we're talking about. Today we're going to be looking at mono Red Tron. This is a anti-meta control burn Tron strategy. Really interesting deck list. So let's hit the intro and jump into the deck tech. All right, here we are with the deck. Let's run it down real quick. Now, you'll see a couple of interesting things, so let's talk about them. First off, this is a mono Red Tron deck. You have 8 mountains, and then you have 4 Urza's Towers and 3 power plants and 3 mines. Now, you'd be crazy not to notice that there are not 4 of each Tron lands in a deck designed for Tron. Well, ultimately, this deck's goal is not to assemble turn 3 Tron. It's just to assemble Tron during the game at some point. So it's not 100% necessary. Also, the fact that you have double red pips on Rolling Thunder, which is one of your primary win conditions, as well as one of your primary board control conditions, means that you need to be hitting mountains fairly often. So the 3 of each here, and then the 4 up on towers, which is the most powerful of the Tron lands, makes a lot of sense. You'll see we also have 3 expedition maps here, 4 candy trails, and 4 lightning bolts. Candy trail and expedition maps serve to really manipulate the top of your deck and find you those Tron lands you need. We also have 4 Oliphants here to tutor for a mountain, so we do have a lot of redundancy in the mana base and a lot of fixing, which I do like. We have 4 Volcanic Spites here. This is a 2 mana instant that deals 3 damage to a creature, and if you want to, you can put a card from the bottom of your library, from your hand onto the bottom of your library and draw a new card. This helps just kind of smooth things out. The deck doesn't have a ton of draw, so this helps kind of cycle through some of those dead cards. 3 Rolling Thunders, as I mentioned before. This is one of your primary win conditions. It's also one of your primary board stabilizers. This is an X double red fireball type effect, except you can assign the damage among any number of targets, however you want. So it really allows you some flexibility, especially once you get Tron online, to just nuke your opponent or to wipe their board if needed. You'll definitely see this card get played a few times in the feature games. We have 4 Fiery Cannonades. This is really just to hold the aggro decks in check. It also has a really interesting plan where it does not kill our own Crimson Fleet Commodore as it is a pirate, but it does kill our own Filigree Familiar, so we're able to cash those in to draw cards at instant speed, which does come into play a couple of times. Speaking of, we have 4 Filigree Familiars here. This is just a 2/2 for 3. ETB, gain 2 life, and when it dies, you draw a card. Great, great card. Not played enough, in my opinion. Really efficient, does a lot of work. 4 Crimson Fleet Commodore. This is for that Monarch. We have 4 Self-Assemblers. This is kind of just a staple in most of the big Tron decks that don't have multicolored payoffs. It's a 4/4 for 5 that allows you to get another 4/4 for 5 and just keep the ball rolling. In my experience, this has been the weakest card in the deck, so if you are looking at playing this deck and you want to make some changes, you want to add some cards here, this is definitely the slot I would look at to do it, as in general, this is just not the most efficient card and feels a little bit slow for this format. It also doesn't trade with a lot of the mono blue threats, and it's much too slow to keep up with a Myr Enforcer. So overall, I think this card is very mid and is definitely the available cards on the table for cuts and changes. Next up, we have 4 Boarding Parties. This is pretty much the staple red finisher these days. 6/3 haste with Cascade for 6. Great card, single red pip. We love it here. Unfortunately, it will cascade into a lot of your 1-drops, and I had that experience throughout my week of testing, but when it high rolls, it feels very, very strong. So 6-drop into a 4-drop, 6-drop into a 5-drop, those type of situations feel quite good. Also worth noting that when you cascade, the spell resolves before the creature, so things like Fiery Cannonade will wipe the board to make sure they don't have chump blockers for your Birding Party, which then comes down without damage, so definitely helpful. And then we have those 4 Oliphants I mentioned before. This is for mountain cycling, but it does come into play as a single red pip as a solid trampoline creature that does help you get through some board stall positions in the late game. Just a lot of flexibility there. I really liked that card. Lastly, in the sideboard, we have a pretty succinct sideboard here. We have 4 Red Elemental Blasts, we have 3 Relics of Progenitus, we have 4 Cast Identifiers, but then we have 4 Pyrite Spellbombs. This is a really interesting option here. It's the old Spellbomb, so you don't get to do the thing and draw a card, but you get to either deal 2 damage or draw a card. Interesting card. I did bring it in a couple of different matchups. Not 100% sure I'm sold on that, so that would be another option for where to make cuts. Otherwise, the deck seemed quite difficult to play, but very rewarding. Definitely seemed like it had play against most of the decks. It definitely is sideboard against almost the entire metagame. Really interesting deck to play, and I hope you enjoy. Let's jump into match number 1. All right, this is match number 1 against Godzilla Shotgun. We are on the play. This is an interesting hand. You will see a lot of kind of weird keepable hands, but it does have double Candy Trail and a Filigree Familiar, so we're really going to be able to smooth out our draws and create kind of the hand that we want as we go through the game. So let's go ahead and run it. We're going to lead on a mine into a Candy Trail. No reason to play a mountain yet and show the opponent what we're on. Sometimes they'll think we're against Combotron or something along those lines. Second Candy Trail does show us a tower, but we're still a ways away from Tron. Opponent shows us Island into a Simic Growth Chamber, which is a really strange opening. Discards a Thermokarst to hand size, which is super interesting. Not sure I would make that play from the opponent, but maybe they don't have a second forest. Maybe they're just stuck on Simic Growth Chamber Island, so the Thermokarst isn't playable right now, but we've definitely showed them Tron lands immediately, so all of their land removal is going to be at a premium against us, and that feels like a very, very bad discard. That being said, we have no idea what the opponent is on. Some side of either Timur or blue-green Ponza. Really weird deck. But you will see as the game progresses, this deck is quite interesting, and I hope you enjoy this match. So let's continue. We're just going to play a Filigree Familiar, start putting some pressure on the board since the opponent hasn't shown us anything yet. Opponent Temporal springs us to put our land back on top, which is a little bit unfortunate. We did have the option of Candy Trailing there to draw. But we just make our land drop, play another Filigree Familiar. Opponent foretells a card, which is fine. Not a ton we need to worry about there. We're just going to attack for 4 here. Play our land. We can sack the Candy Trails to draw cards at end of turn. Opponent's going to play their Foretold card. I thought it was going to be a Behold the Multiverse, but it was a Cerul's Packmate. We're going to draw a couple cards here. We're going to draw a Self-Assembler and start the chain here. We could have attacked to draw a card there, but the opponent just passes back. We have the Bolt for the Cerul's Packmate, and the opponent is just going to scoop here. Appears that they're on either a very counterspell light deck or something along the lines of no counter spells, which would seem very strange. Or maybe they were just land screwed and didn't want to continue. They'd rather save the mental damage and go to game number 2. So let's go ahead and head to game number 2. All right, game number 2. We did not sideboard for this game. Unsure that we have anything to really bring in against Ponza. We can bring in these red Elemental Blasts. We did see Temporal Spring, but we didn't see any counter spells. We are mono red, so I would assume they're going to bring in some number of Hydroblasts against us. But we'll honestly just kind of have to see how game 2 goes. Because they scooped so quickly in game 1, I wasn't 100% sure they were going to play out game 2. So I didn't sideboard. I just queued it up as quick as possible. We'll see how this game goes. We're on the draw. This is another weird hand, but we do have natural Tron with the Expedition map. We can 1, 2, 3 it into something like a self-assembler. We don't have red, but we do have an Oliphant to get a mountain, so we should be okay there. Opponent starts on land Utopia Sprawl, which is pretty brutal, because if they have like a turn 2 Thermokarst or something, we're in a lot of trouble. We're going to lead on Expedition map. And they play a Rhystic Study. Wild card. Never, ever would have expected that. But they're going to start drawing cards off of it very quickly because we have to play on curve sometimes. We end of turn the Expedition map, and they have a Mirror Shell Crab to counter the ability, which is brutal against us. At the end of the day, there's not anything we could have done to play around that. Really hurts, though. We're going to go ahead and cast this Expedition map. On the opponent's Rhystic Study trigger, we're just going to cycle this Oliphant. Now, technically, we should have cycled the Oliphant first, so that we could pay for the Rhystic Study trigger, but I wanted to have Lightning Bolt available, so we're going to let them draw a card here. Opponent has the Thermokarst, which is pretty unfortunate, just barely keeping us off Tron here, which would really unlock our hand because we'd get to deploy a lot to the board very quickly. We hit another Oliphant, so we thin our deck. Opponent has an Acid Moss to follow up the Thermokarst, really starting to hurt our land base. We crack the Expedition map just to ensure we're hitting our land drops, because we definitely need to start landing Filigree Familiars if we're going to dig ourselves out of this situation. We are going to do just that. Again, the opponent is going to continue drawing off the Rhystic Study, but we are going to start getting on the board. We haven't seen a creature besides Mirror Shell Crab from the opponent yet, so... and the Cyril's Packmate, but we do have a Lightning Bolt to deal with that. Opponent plays a second Rhystic Study, which is crazy. They're going to be drawing a lot of cards here. Unfortunately, we have to give them 2 red here. Opponent casts a Fadeaway, which is a wild card. For each creature, its opponent controller sacrifices a permanent unless they pay some cost. Obviously, we're tapped out, so we have to sacrifice 2 permanents. We sacked both Filigree Familiars to cash in on card draw. Wild card. Never would have played around that. We go ahead and play the Filigree Familiar. We've got a Lightning Bolt up. We're just going to bolt the Cyril's Packmate, keep him off the board. We're trying to set up for a Crimson Fleet Commodore so we can start drawing ourselves out of this mana deficit. Unfortunately, we have to give the opponent a lot of cards when we do that, which means they're going to keep drawing land destruction, which is very unfortunate. Cursed Chains on the Filigree Familiar seems very strange. I guess they just didn't want to deal with the pressure of a 2/2, but seems odd. We do commit the Crimson Fleet Commodore here. They have a clear board. We haven't seen a ton of creatures from the opponent, just the Mirror Shell Crab and the Packmate. So the Monarch seems pretty safe here. We're going to go ahead and start drawing, hoping to just hit land drops. We want to just start to dig our way out of this land screw. Opponent has double Thermokarst, though, which is pretty brutal. And then they have a Temporal Spring. And they drop a Tolarian Terror. This shows us they are a little bit graveyard-oriented, so that's something to keep in mind for game number 3. Looks like this game is going to be a loss, but we do continue the fight. We're going to Volcanic Spite our own Filigree Familiar, putting a Self-Assembler on the bottom so that we can draw some cards. We hit a land and a Candy Trail, which is very nice. We're going to go ahead and cast land in the Candy Trail. We hit a 4th land, which is helpful. We get to recast the Crimson Fleet Commodore, but unfortunately the opponent gets to steal the Tolarian Terror. They have an Acid Moss to keep us off 4 mana. And they have a Temporal Spring to set us all the way back. We keep fighting the fight here because we are at a very high life total, so we have some time. And the opponent is at 24 cards with a Monarch, so if they can't finish us quickly and we're able to deal with this Tolarian Terror or something like that, they aren't going to have the time. But after casting Owlbear, I mean, the writing is on the wall here. We are on, what is that, a 2-turn clock. We're going to cast the Candy Trail just to see what's on top, but looks like this game is probably over. The opponent hit a huge amount of land destruction there. I think out of 12 land destruction spells, they hit 10. Now, granted, they are, 2/3 of the way through their deck, so we are going to have to deal with a lot of it, but it felt bad. Make that 11 of 12. And then that's pretty much all for game number 2. We're going to let the opponent get the lethal swing here, but opponent shows us a mana leak. And that's kind of all she wrote. So off to game number 3 against Godzilla Shotgun. Game number 3, we are back on the play. This time we did make some sideboarding. We've seen a lot more of the opponent's deck now, so we took out all these fiery cannonades. We took out some boarding parties. Ultimately, this was just a play to drop some of the mana costs in the deck because I didn't think we would be getting to mana cost that high. After seeing how many land destruction spells the opponent was packing, I just really didn't have faith that we were going to be hitting 6 mana, so I took a bunch of these out. We brought in the Red Blast to deal with Tolarian Terror as well as the Rhystic Studies, which drew the opponent a ton of cards last game. It also deals with Mana Leak, which we saw last game. And then we also brought in the Relics of Progenitus. This is just to try to slow down their Tolarian Terror. But also, because the deck didn't seem like it has a ton and it draws a lot of cards or is designed to draw a lot of cards, I thought maybe there was some refresh mechanic, maybe a campfire or some sort of stream of thought shenanigans where they're going to put cards back in their deck to avoid decking out. So I'm going to go ahead and bring those in just to stop that. We are on the play. This is definitely a reasonable hand here. We have an Elemental Blast, we have a removal spell, Candy Trail, and a Monarch, which definitely seemed very impactful last game because we got to hold on to it for a very long time. So hopefully we get to drop that, and let's see what happens. Opponent mulls to 6. We're going to lead on a Candy Trail. We see land Rolling Thunder. Opponent has another Utopia Sprawl start, which is pretty brutal. We're just going to play the tower and hope that they don't have a Thermokarst. Or if they do, that they have a Rhystic Study instead. They do have Rhystic Study, so we're able to get a Red Blast down on that, which feels good. We're going to slow them down a little bit. And they don't hit our land drop, which is fantastic. We have an Expedition map. Opponent goes for the Thermokarst. We're just going to draw off the Candy Trail here. Looks like we're going to be on a mono-red game plan today. We hit an Oliphant. We're going to hold the Expedition map here. Not sure about this. This is really just in case we draw the other lands. Opponent puts a land on top, though, so we're going to go ahead and shuffle the deck. We redraw the tower anyway, and then they put it right back on top. Opponent isn't making land drops, though, so as annoying as this repetition is, at the end of the day, they're not progressing their board either, and they're running out of cards, and I'm not. So we're just going to continue to allow them to make these Temporal Spring plays. That is 3 now, if you're counting. We're just going to replay the land and pass. We have double Volcanic Spite up, which is great because they play a Jewel Thief, which we didn't see at all in game 1. We're going to cycle the Elephant and then go ahead and Volcanic Spite here. We can throw the Self-Assembler back. Really just doesn't feel like we're going to get there. We do hit our 4th land, which is fantastic. We get to start the Crimson Fleet Commodore. So now we have our Monarch. Opponent has Acid Moss for us, which is unfortunate, but it is fine. Now that we've gotten the Monarch on the board, anything they do that doesn't impact the board is good for us. We go back up to 4 lands, hit for 5, start to put a little bit of pressure on the opponent. We have a 2nd Commodore, which is pretty nice in case they're able to sneakily steal it back. We go to 5 mana for this Self-Assembler. Opponent, unfortunately, has a mana leak, which is brutal for us here. We do attack, though, because we have a little bit of the initiative. If the opponent just takes it and goes to 10 there, they can steal the Monarch back. But it doesn't look like they have many creatures, and we're going to be able to steal it again right after that. So I was willing to offer that trade. Opponent does take it, though, and then plays a Packmate. We're able to remove that Packmate, and we're just going to play it a little bit slower. We're going to hold. We see a Relic, though, which is great. We're going to go ahead and use the Relic, and if the opponent doesn't have a Tolarian Terror or something to play right now, they're never going to, so pretty good for us. We're going to be able to pop this to draw a card. I'm just crossing my fingers they don't have a Terror, and they don't, which is fantastic. We're going to go ahead and pop this to exile their graveyard. Hit another Candy Trail. We hit land and another Spite. Opponent has a mana leak, but again, that's fine. It's not impacting the board, and we have the Monarch, so we are just stacking value here. Opponent just hard commits a Moonshell Crab, which is wild. That is going to stick around for a while. Was really hoping to hit a Red Blast or something so that I can deal with the Moonshell Crab, but we do hit a Relic, which is pretty good. We're going to go ahead and play this Boarding Party just as a blocker, funny enough. Not willing to trade off the Monarch now, because if they follow it with another Moonshell Crab or something, we're in a lot of trouble. Opponent has a Jewel Thief here. We are going to give the opponent a card to Lightning Bolt the Jewel Thief. Really wish we could finish off the crab, but the mana just doesn't work. We're going to play a Filigree Familiar. Once again, just a blocker for the crab here. We're going to hold up some removal. As long as we can protect this Monarch, I think we're probably going to be fine. Unfortunately, none of our creatures trade 1-for-1 with this crab. It's fucking enormous. But if we can hit a Red Blast, we'll be able to deal with that, which is fine. We're going to go ahead and draw some cards here. Opponent does have the removal for our tower, which is super annoying, but we have Expedition Map, which is good. We are finally going to get rid of this crab with a Red Blast. We have just enough mana open to pay for a mana leak if the opponent has a mana leak. They are down to 2 cards in hand. But they are very quickly running out of time here. Only 4.5 minutes left. We're going to drop this Expedition Map. That gives us Tron next turn. It's worth noting, I think we only have 1 tower left in the deck. Opponent has another Moonshell Crab, which is pretty annoying. I play a Mountain there, which I definitely shouldn't have done. I should have just cracked the Expedition Map for the tower. That's on me. Candy Trail does show us the tower, which is kind of hilarious, just as a could have found me little taunt there. We're going to go ahead and play the Crimson Fleet Commodore just as another blocker. Keep the 1 mana up. We're going to go ahead and block the Moonshell Crab. Once again, very annoying, but it's not going to have enough pressure to close out the game. Opponent is getting very low on time, 3 mana. We finally have Tron enabled, so we're going to commit to the board here. Got Oliphant into another Oliphant, paying for the Rhystic Study both times. So opponent is down to 1 card. We've got double blockers here. And it looks like we've finally turned the corner against this deck. Blue, green. Opponent has a fadeaway, but we're able to sacrifice 2 other permanents. They do Temporal Spring one of them back, so we give them the Monarch, but we are going to take it back with Trample the following turn anyway, so that's not a problem. And we swing with the Oliphant, and the opponent says GG and scoops it up. So great first game from this deck against a green-blue land destruction deck, which should be an absolutely abysmal matchup for us. But we power through it somehow. Definitely less vulnerable to this sort of disruption than other Tron strategies would be that rely more heavily on the Tron lands to really turn on the deck, as you saw. I mean, we played most of that game without Tron active, and it still kind of pulled through. So let's try something a little more meta this time, see if the deck can keep up there. I apologize for the coughing and sniffling. I've had the cold for 3 months that everyone else has had, but really just trying to power through it and make sure that these videos are coming out consistently for you guys, so I hope you appreciate it. All right, this is match number 2. We are against Unwidge. Not sure how you pronounce that name, but we are on the draw. And this is a perfectly fine hand, so we're going to run it. Opponent starts on Ancient Den in the Springleaf Drum. This is very clearly either white-blue affinity, Jeskai affinity. See Moon Circuit Hacker, so I'm pretty sure that it's white-blue affinity. Opponent just commits for the Moon Circuit Hacker there. We have the Volcanic Spite to kill it. Opponent has a second ninja, though, so we are going to take a hit from one. Replays the Thraben Inspector, and then plays a Myr Enforcer, which is very fast. Unfortunately, we can wipe the board of everything but the Myr Enforcer, but it's just not going to be enough. Opponent has an All That Glitters, and now we are in a lot of trouble. Pre-sideboard, we don't have any answers for this. We're going to play a Self-Assembler as a chump blocker, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be enough. We do have Natural Tron, but it's just not going to be fast enough, unfortunately. And the opponent has the Galvablast, showing us that they are indeed on like hard Jeskai with ninjas, which is a really interesting adaptation of that list. Probably not running the Synthesizer variant. But good to know. We've seen what we're up against, so let's go to game number 2 with a sideboard plan. All right, game number 2. We are taking out the Crimson Fleet Commodores. The emblem just feels like a liability against a deck with so many 1-drops that are going to come down and be able to swarm, especially with things like Ornithopters and Ninjas. They're going to be able to get around a lot of our blockers, so don't want that to be able to fuel the opponent. We take out a lot of the Fiery Cannonades. Ultimately, this is an interesting choice, but it was a choice basically to say that I want as much of my like artifact removal as possible. I think that the Cast into the Fires are just better than the Fiery Cannonades here. We do bring in some number of red Elemental Blasts, so we bring in almost the whole batch here. We just leave the Relics and 1 Elemental Blast behind. So we brought in the 3 Elemental Blasts, we brought in the 4 Cast into Fires, and we brought in Pirate Spellbomb. And we brought in the Spell Bombs. This is just to try to get around things like Turn Aside and counters like that, since it's a permanent, not a spell targeting. Otherwise, we are on the play, so let's go ahead and kick it off. Unfortunately, you have to mulligan here. But this is a much better hand, so we're going to keep this. This is a very removal-heavy hand. We'll put the Self-Assembler back. Once again, like I said, it's kind of been the least impressive card. Opponent leads on a Thraben Inspector. We're going to put a Candy Trail down, hold a Mountain for a Lightning Bolt. Opponent leads into a Frogmite. This is fine. We have another Lightning Bolt, so we're going to just Lightning Bolt and have a Pyrite Spellbomb up. Opponent has a Hacker. We're going to pop the Pyrite Spellbomb to kill the Hacker. He's going to replay the Inspector. Ultimately, probably could have taken the hit from the Ninja there. The removal is really just to whiff all that glitters. And if we can do that, we probably win. Opponent goes Myr Enforcer into all that glitters, but he targets the Inspector, not the Myr Enforcer. So we do have a Lightning Bolt available for that, which is a huge tempo swing. The opponent's down to 1 card here. They have a Thought Cast. We're going to go ahead and crack the Candy Trail, hope to hit a counter, but we don't. They hit Springleaf Ornithopter, though, so not a ton of pressure coming out of the opponent. We draw a card. We have Rolling Thunder. We really needed to hit Tron there so we could wipe the opponent's board. That would have been the save. Opponent just hits for 4, has a Ninja, though. So they're going to hit for 6. We have a blue elemental blast, or a red elemental blast, sorry, to deal with the Ninja. And then we hit the Cast into Fire. Cast into Fire, pretty important here. We go down to 4. We cast it prematurely, though, which I'm not sure of, but it was a setup so that we could remove the board. Because we didn't have Tron to deal with the Myr Enforcer. Unfortunately, they do have the second All That Glitters, and we're pretty much dead here. We are live to a Cast into Fire, but unfortunately, we don't have it. So the opponent takes game number 2. GG's to Unuage. Jeskai Glitters just a little bit too fast for this deck, even with all the sideboard slots. Admittedly, used my removal a little bit too frivolously there. Definitely something to change for the future. Need to be way more stringent with my removal to make sure we're catching those All That Glitters when they try to resolve, instead of just keeping the board minimized, because anything is a threat with this enchantment on it. So that's a misplay on my part. Definitely think I could have won that game if I played it a little bit better. But GG's to the opponent there. We take a loss. All right, last but not least, we have a third match, just a little bonus match for you guys from Doc Dan Japan, or Doc Dan JP. We are on the play, so let's see what our opening hand looks like. Unfortunately, it's a no land hand, so we definitely are going to mulligan this. This is a much more keepable hand, but we do have to hit 1 more land for it to really be online with the Filigree Familiar, but let's run it like this. I'm going to put the Rolling Thunder back since it's the only uncastable card in the hand. Opponent's going to show us a Forest. And cycle a Troll, so they are on some sort of black-green. Then they show us a Satyr Wayfinder, so they are on the Lotleth Troll Dread Return self-mill strategy. We're going to go ahead and Volcanic Spite just so that we can draw a card. Opponent has a Stinkweed Imp. We're going to remove the Stinkweed Imp. We're really just trying to minimize the opponent's board pressure so we can make room for this Crimson Fleet Commodore, and we do hit the land drop to get there, so that line pays off. Opponent just dredges the Stinkweed Imp, replays it. We have another Lightning Bolt, though, so we are definitely slowing the opponent down quite a bit and applying some pressure. Hitting for 3, or hitting for 5 here. If the opponent dredges the Stinkweed Imp again, we know that they aren't drawing a land. Which is nice. Opponent just goes for a Satyr Wayfinder instead. And misses, which is great for us. We're going to go ahead and attack for 7 here. Opponent blocks, though, which is quite good for us. We don't have to worry about anything there. We can hold the Fiery Cannonade. Opponent just hard casts a Dread Return to nuke us for 15, though, which is pretty brutal. We're going to end a turn, draw a card from the Filigree Familiar. We just want to see if we can hit a land drop. We're really looking for Tron here. We're going to go ahead and attack just to see if the opponent takes the trade. They do, though. This is not bad for us, though, since the opponent already has another Lotless Giant in the graveyard that they could get back if they had another Dread return. So there's nothing we could really do about that. Opponent has a Knot of the Bone to give them a lot of life, though, so that strategy really isn't working. We finally hit a mine, so we have Tron. Boarding Party hits a Candy Trail, though, which is a little unfortunate. Definitely not a high-value play we needed to turn the tide of this game. But it is an attack for 8, so we do have a clock on the opponent. We need to keep building on it, though. They have a Mire Triton, which is very annoying, because that Death Touch is just quite good. And a Scrapwork Mutt. Really need to hit a Volcanic or a Rolling Thunder or something here. We go ahead and draw with the Candy Trail. We don't hit anything, which is unfortunate. We've got an Oliphant here. We're just going to attack into the Death Touch, which feels real bad. But I don't think we can let the opponent assemble a board here, and we don't have any removal, so we have to offer the trade. Unfortunately, they do have another Dread return. And we gain some life looking for something to do about it, but nothing to have. And we go ahead and lose game 1 to the opponent. All right, game 2 against Stockdan JP. This time with more Relics of Progenitus. We also brought in a single Pyrite Spellbomb. Again, been fairly unsatisfied with these self-assemblers, so we took them all out. The Pyrite Spellbomb really just helps us draw through or helps us remove one of their creatures if they try to amass a Dread Return flashback. Otherwise, we're just trying to draw to a relic. We are on the play, though, so this is our advantage. And this is certainly a keepable hand, although it's not a super lot of pressure. We did see the ability of just slamming the Monarch against the opponent, so it sounds like that's going to be our plan again. We lead with a Lightning Bolt. We are going to need to find a mine for Tron, though. We play the tower and just pass back, holding the Lightning Bolt open. Opponent has a Mire Triton, mills Knot of the Bone, and Dread Return. We're going to go ahead and cycle the Oliphant here and just keep the Fiery Cannonade up in case the opponent commits more to the board. Opponent just attacks for 2 here. They do commit to the board, which is great because we get additional value out of this Fiery Cannonade. We were probably going to cast anyway because we want to cast our Crimson Fleet Commodore. Once again, we put the question to the opponent of whether or not they want to draw a new card or dredge the Stinkweed Imp. They do dredge the Stinkweed Imp. They go for a Bramblewood or a Blanchwood Prowler, sorry, and then a Scrapwork Muck, just trying to build up to that flashback Dread return. Fortunately, they don't have any Lotless Giants in the graveyard, which is pretty good, and we're able to remove both with a Rolling Thunder. Just hit for 5. Still looking for a mine, though. Opponent has a Wayfinder and replays the Stinkweed Imp. We still have the Lightning Bolt for the Stinkweed Imp, so we know that they can't kill our Crimson Fleet Commodore. We go ahead and double bottom up the Candy Trail. We'll wipe the board again, and then we'll hit for another 5, put the opponent to 12, really kind of put them in a position to force the Knot of the Bone. They once again commit to the board, though. They flashback Acorn Harvest by taking 3, putting them to 9 to get this Troll back. We go ahead and attack. They do block, so we're going to use this Volcanic Spite to deal 3 to their face. And we're getting the trade anyway. We also draw a new card off of it. And then we hit the Lightning Bolt off of the Monarch, so they are dead if they go for Knot of the Bone, because they only have 1 in the yard. They do, in fact, go for the Knot of the Bone, and then we go ahead and kill them in response. So off to game number 3 against the opponent. All right, and finally the decisive game number 3. No changes to the sideboard. We kept the same sideboard here. But we are on the draw this time, so let's see how our hand looks. We have Natural Tron into a Crimson Fleet Commodore with a Volcanic Spite, so this is a pretty decent hand. We're going to go ahead and run it. Opponent starts on a tapped land, which is pretty good for us. We're going to lead on a we're going to lead on a tower, sorry, because we top decked and colorless cards, so natural Tron actually advances the board, unlike previously where we need a red drop, red pip to be able to cast anything. Second Filigree Familiar is even better for us, so we're going to go for the third Tron piece and go ahead and double drop these Filigree Familiars. We hit a boarding party to play next turn, which is even better, because now we can play that instead of the Crimson Fleet Commodore. Opponent cycles a Troll of Khazad-dûn, has another Nod of the Bone in the graveyard, so good to keep an eye on that. Just hard cast a Dread Return to get a Troll back. We offer the trade and the opponent takes it. We hit another land drop, and we'll go ahead and boarding party here. Once again hitting a 1-drop, which really is not what you want to see, unfortunate, but we go ahead and attack. We could have lightning bolted the Troll there to make sure they can't block for value on the familiar, but they take the trade with the boarding party anyway. They mill a couple Acorn Harvests there, but they still can't flashback Dread Return. We're going to go ahead and Volcanic Spite to draw a card here. Play the Crimson Fleet Commodore, and then we do have the play and pop of the Relic here. We hit another land, which is unfortunate, but we have the Monarch, so we're going to keep drawing. We hit a Lightning Bolt, which is great. And now we have some pressure from the opponent. Opponent shows us an Earth Rift, which is a super wild card, but it has double red for flashback, so opponent only on 1 red source currently. Acorn Harvest, Dread Return. No Lotless Giant in the graveyard, and they do have to rebuild a mass of creatures. We're going to have a lot of removal, though. They play a Lotless Giant for 2. They do attack, so we're just going to chump block. We're going to take the extra card. They go ahead and commit to the Acorn Harvest, but we have a Volcanic Spite to deal with the Lotleth. And then we're going to Fiery Cannonade at end of turn. I'm going to play an Oliphant to provide a lot of pressure for next turn. It attacks for 13 next turn, so we should have lethal here every time. Opponent goes to the double flashback for the Lotleth Giant, and we have the Fiery Cannonade in response, so that they only have 2 creatures. We have double Lightning Bolt, and we're attacking for 13 with Trample, so this is GG's to the opponent. They have no Nod of the Bones, so GG's. And that wraps up our featured games. All in all, this deck was a ton of fun to play. I hope you guys enjoyed the games. Definitely showed some highlights of the deck as well as some weak points of the deck. Definitely liked showing you guys a loss. It does happen. Not every game is going to be a win, so it's nice to show you guys some matches where things don't always go to plan. And really thought that match 1 was super interesting against a rogue deck that was anti-land, playing a Tron deck and fighting through it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday afternoon with me. And as usual, goodbye forever, unless I see you next time.